Back to Why Do I? This is the podcast that explores behaviours in different types of relationships. My name's Tom Stroud. Today we are going to talk about something which I find incredibly relevant to my own life, and that's why do I fear aging, right? In my experience, as I've gotten older, aging has been a privilege. It's allowed me to know more about myself than I've ever known. It's allowed me to have a much more expansive worldview, but I'm not sure that that's something which society necessarily agrees with. My view is that society fears aging, it villainises it. And on the show today, I've got an incredible guest in Poorna Bell. Poorna, why are you sat on the sofa with me today?
I am sat on the sofa because I'm an author and a journalist, and I have just come out with a book called She Wanted More. And there is a chapter in it that looks at aging. Actually, to be honest, it's woven into the whole book. So it's charting what aging looks like for especially focusing on women in their 40s, 50s and 60s. But I definitely think it's a conversation that affects, all genders and especially younger people who are looking ahead to thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it just occurred to me that we have such a fear-based narrative around aging. I had to really confront how I feel about a lot of things within that. But I also do a lot of sports. And so I was really interested in things that can insulate and help with the fear that we have around aging. And I decided to take up competitive weightlifting at the age of 38.
Yes, so good.
Having never lifted weights at all and having been absolutely tragic at PE when I was at school.
Right.
And so a lot of that required rewriting a different narrative, unlearning some of the conditioning that I'd had around physical movement.
Uh-huh.
But there was this one chapter which focused on older women in particular. And it was interviewing women who weren't elite athletes, who were doing things in their 60s, 70s and 80s for fun. And one woman in particular did pole vaulting in her 70s. And it was during COVID, because I wrote this book during COVID. So all of the recreational grounds had shut. And she was telling me about how she was practicing hurdles in the back garden and had strung up a washing line to do so. And I think I was just really taken aback by their fearlessness.
Yeah.
They didn't allow this narrative around what they should or shouldn't be doing. And that was a little seedling that then sprouted into so many other areas around, fashion, around career, dating and relationships and all of that. And so that's why I decided to chart the whole thing in the book.
Amazing. All right, so let's take a step out of this. And the first thing I want to ask you about is whether you believe that there is this sort of narrative that aging is a negative thing societally.
I think that, hugely so. I think the explanation that everyone loves to give for it is capitalism, right? So if you are sold this problem and you're told that, as you get older, you can do less, you're diminishing. If you lionize youth and you sell people this idea that actually if you try and look as young as you can possibly look for as long as possible, then you'll be able to hold on to all of this power or acceptance or whatever it is. But when I was doing some digging, and there are, historians and beauty journalists who can speak to this far better than I can, but since time began, I think human beings have been obsessed with the idea of eternal youth and, living forever. And so I think that it's, capitalism didn't always exist. So I had to question, well, what was the reasoning for that? And it's just, I think it's fear of dying, And I just think that we find it really hard to comprehend, especially physical changes, I think, within ourselves. And so I think that where we're at the moment, because we have the technology and we have the capabilities to maybe alter or change or halt some of these things, I think that's why it's woven into this very, very messy ball where we're told that aging is bad, but hey, here's a solution if you'd like it.
Yeah.
And I think that it just keeps us stuck in this cycle of dissatisfaction and where we're always either looking back to the past or how we can halt the present and fear for the future. And it never allows us to sit easily within any of those spaces.
Yeah. And one of the big conversational topics about this is the gender difference, right? And I think let's go into it because, as I said at the top of the episode, I found I'm not afraid of getting old. And I think that's because, when we think about all of the sort of narratives that are created about men aging, they're probably very different to women. Like I got called a silver fox the other day, and that's a compliment when it comes to that sort of male context. I'm not sure that would be appropriate if it was flipped on its head, and I don't think you'd ever call a woman a silver fox, for example. So I'm interested in sort of exploring that a little bit.
Yeah, there is. I think that men and women do experience this, right? So it's not that men are immune to this, and definitely when we look at things around, body image and so on, I completely appreciate and acknowledge that things are difficult for men, maybe in a different way. But there is for sure a gender gap. It affects women at an earlier age than it does men. And you're absolutely right. I mean, vocabulary is really important. It's something that I feel very strongly about in lots of different areas. And there is no equivalent for women. If someone finds out what my age is, so I'm 45, what I tend to get is, oh my God, but you don't look your age, or you look good for your age. But there's no term, I think at best, and this is only really within a dating context, is cougar. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a compliment. That's not a compliment to anyone. And it implies this kind of voraciousness and desperation. And the connotations of the language that we use around women getting older, I just don't think is the same. And I think when you consider the differences that we would have had, right, from the time we were children, I think that there is such an overemphasis for women in terms of our appearance and, hyperfemininity and what we look like. And that, to me, only gets more and more pronounced the older you get. So it makes perfect sense to me that there is a much wider gulf when men and women both equally hit 40 at the same time. But I do have male friends who are in middle age, and they're going through their own thing, for slightly different reasons.
But interesting, I mean, someone would say to you, hey, you don't look your age, as a compliment. And I'm like, why is that a compliment? It strikes me as quite unusual when there are so many things which probably mean a lot more to you, which would be taken as complimentary.
Well, also there's a overemphasis on aesthetics, and I think that I'm sure that you felt this as well. The older I've gotten, the more I have an appreciation for actually what's really important. And that's just from life experiences that I've been through, I think if you've been through any kind of sustained period of illness or injury or whatever that is, that your aesthetics don't help you in that regard. No one's going, oh, you know what? I know what got you through your illness, your six pack. Like, no one's saying that. And so when you think about the things that really matter in life, and especially as you get older, and if you were to ask anyone what they want for their old age, the likelihood is going to be, I want to be able to do the stuff that I enjoy and love doing for as long as possible, right? When you really drill down into it, aesthetics don't necessarily really help you with that. I mean, you can pursue things like physical fitness, but the aesthetics are a byproduct of that. I don't think that they should be the primary pursuit.
No, I agree. I mean, that's even in terms of the way that I train now, and I use that term very loosely because I'm not a professional athlete, but I spend half my time when I'm moving physically, stretching now and doing mobility work, because I understand that that's the thing which is going to give me longevity over having big muscles, and I reflect back on my motivations for physical exercise when I was in my 20s, and it was literally to look good, And there's this realization that I think a lot of men have where, and this is a sweeping generalization, but I'll stand by it. You, as a man, when you're younger, you train to look good because you think that's going to make you more attractive to potential partners. And my experience is that for the most part, people don't really care about that stuff.
No, I don't think so. And you will see it on social media all the time if you read the comments of things, like especially these posts that are around like male physique, right?
Yeah.
Which is that women are very direct and honest that, and no shade to anyone that has a bodybuilder physique, and a lot of hard work goes into that, but that's not really what we're attracted to. And you will hear that time and time again. But the disconnection there is that men think that that's what we're into because that's what's roadmap to them, and they're told that this is like this is the peak that you should aspire to.
Exactly.
But if you, I cannot remember his name, but there's this guy who used to compete in the World's Strongest Man competitions all the time. This guy is like so strong. He's done so much. And someone asked him, about six-pack abs. And he was like, what are six-pack abs? They're not a thing. They're just a sign that you don't eat enough.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of really break that down. And I was like, yeah, actually, over time, I remember being so fixated on that in my 20s and even my early 30s, that's something I had to have.
Yeah.
And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that they're not really a sign of anything, you know? And actually there's so much other stuff. Like I want to be able to do handstands and cartwheels, and that's the stuff that I want to do.
Because
and
that's useful. It's movement that
exactly.
you can use in your life.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So, no, I find it fascinating. We spoke a little bit right at the top of the episode again about that societal view of aging. Can you think of any examples in your life where you felt, as you've gotten older, that you've felt maybe slightly ostracized from a group, or there have been opportunities which might have presented themselves to you when you were in your 20s or your 30s where that hasn't happened now?
I think some of it is abstract. So some of it is a sense or a feeling that you don't belong.
Yeah.
But I can also be quite socially awkward. And so there's a part of me that is like, Poorna, is this your deep paranoia that you've had since school, that, you know, you're not included in the group, or is this actually a thing?
Right, interesting.
And I think that definitely in recent times, I would say this has maybe been in the last year, right? There haven't been dramatic examples, but it's a sense that I'm sort of wallpaper. And I would say that the spaces that I've most noticed this in is like, let's say if there are like PR events, or I'm in a room where I know for damn sure that I am the oldest person in that room.
I feel that deeply.
Yeah. And people don't engage in you in conversation. And I think that the last time that this happened, I had to sort of give myself a pep talk. And I'm like, you're of a certain age and you have earned your right to be here and to have that voice. So you don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for people to engage. You can have the conversation in the way that's right for you. And I think that made me open my mouth, and I said things and, you know, made people laugh. And then the more people hear laughter in a room, they want to kind of come nearer to that. And then by the end of it, I had a really good event. But I don't think that would have necessarily happened had I not engineered it that way. But it also was a really nice way of reassuring me that I do have the power in that situation. But the problem is when we believe that other people give us that power, and I just don't. I think in my 40s, the beauty of that is realizing that actually they don't.
Well said. And also I remember being in my early 20s and being in rooms with people that were older than me. And if you flip that narrative in its head, they would scare the shit out of me because, you know, and it wasn't just because, oh my God, he's got grey hair and a belly. Like it was because I felt that those people were quite intimidating because they had a level of authority and self-confidence, which I didn't have at that age. So, and when I'm in those rooms now, I mean, you know, we spoke about it. I run a men's group and it has guys of all kind of different ages in there. And, you know, more often than not, they're not talking to me because, like I say, they're scared or worried of how they're going to come across. And it's almost like I found being in my 40s has given me, to your point, the power and, you know, the self-confidence to be able to basically understand that and then make their experience more comfortable in that environment.
Completely. And the game changer for me, which I wouldn't have had the awareness right in my 20s, but you don't always have to fill gaps of silence. And that I feel is a superpower in your 40s. And but that's also what I think unnerves and unsettles other people who are younger than you, because they don't understand why you're not saying stuff or why you're taking a pause. And I have definitely learned that it's not always my responsibility or my job to reassure and make the other person feel a particular way. And it's not like I'm being rude or I'm not being empathetic or anything like that, but there's also a conservation, I think, of energy there. And I think when I was younger, what I perceived to be feeling intimidated by the other person was maybe not realizing that they were probably just tired and maybe just didn't have anything to say or didn't want anything to say and didn't feel that they needed to speak in order to, you know, to sort of preemptively like reassure the other person around something. But
but I find this, I mean, I say this all the time. If I could put what I know now in this brain into younger Tom's body, like I would have been an elite 20-year-old man rather than an avoidant, you know, fuckboy who didn't know what the hell he was doing. And this is my frustration with it. It's like, you know, I genuinely believe that, aging is a privilege. And I don't know about you, but I feel so much more settled and assured of who I am now than I ever have done. And so I find it so interesting, this idea that societally, you know, you're in your prime when you're in your 20s, because it's just not my reality at all.
I don't think it is for anyone. And I think that the idea, though, that we can shortcut that wisdom I think this is a not worrying, but it's definitely a sign of the times, whether it's, you know, stuff that I see on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, where we are constantly trying to life hack and sell the solutions to younger people around stuff where I'm like, you just need to like live a little and learn from your failures.
Mistakes.
Yeah. And believe me, I do wish I could have learned some of this stuff when I was younger, but I also know what I was like when I was younger, and I'd just be like, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, you know. So I do think you have to humble yourself through life at various points along the way. But there are certain things that I wish I'd maybe grasped a bit sooner that I do see in Gen Z, and I see the way that they are with things. But that is the burden of every generation, Tom, where you wish that you just got into things a bit quicker. I'm sure my mum feels it about certain parts of her life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I don't know if you know a guy called Scott Galloway. Like he's mildly controversial. Some of the stuff he says I massively disagree with, but he does have this take around young people. And his take is that young people need to go out, get drunk and make mistakes. And I'm like, it's not a good message from a health perspective, but that's how I learned to talk to girls. That's how I learned to build friendships. That's how I learned to understand my boundaries, you know. And I think it's the challenge with, you know, how society exists today is that, you can have access to so much information, but it's not your information, you know. It's like this, the TikTok generation is, you know, they are more informed than they ever have been, but it doesn't allow for their own personal experiences.
It's it reminds me, have you ever seen the film Twins?
Yeah,
okay.
With Tom Hanks in it.
Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
And so Arnold Schwarzenegger is raised on this island, right? And so he learns everything about life from books, but it's absolutely useless in the real world because he has like no street smarts. Yeah. And I always think of that with regards to how we are teaching people now, which is you can teach everyone the theory and they can understand the theory, but actually living it and applying it practically are two different things, I think. And also, people are so scared to get things wrong. I mean, I'm still really useless with knowing how to, you know, chat to someone or flirt with someone or whatever. And I still do that whole Homer Simpson thing of like disappearing into a hedge because I just find the whole thing so awkward. And a friend of mine was just saying, what's the worst that could happen? And I just said, I know that on a like theoretical level, but on a practical level, you just have to keep practicing that and learning that the world doesn't end if someone's like, no, I don't fancy you. Right. So it's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, it's another thing Galloway talks about is like rejection sensitivity and how, I suppose when you exist in an environment where a lot of your life is online and you're judging, you know, your attractiveness by likes or comments, you know, getting used to being rejected by another human being is very, very difficult. And I think that's another challenge for young people. And again, a challenge which, God, that would make me feel like absolute rubbish 10 years ago. And now it's like water off a duck's back, you know. It feels more natural. Natural to me? Yeah, because I get rejected all the time now. So, because I'm old.
Yeah, but I was also say, I don't know how your short-term memory is doing, but mine is pretty atrocious because I have no attention span because I'm just online all the time.
Yeah.
So even if something does happen and I do get rejected, I'll probably forget about it in a couple of weeks.
That's
so it'll be
very
fine.
true.
Yeah,
That's very true.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we talk a bit about physical activity and powerlifting and all of that stuff? Because I'm really interested in your perspective on it. The reason I ask is because I have, as I get older, these kind of limiting beliefs, right? Where I'm like, because I haven't done that before and I'm older now and I ache and I'm not as strong as I was, I can't do that anymore. I won't be able to do that. What's your perspective on that?
I feel you on that. I think when I turned 40, like there was a lot of stuff that I had to confront when I turned 40. And I don't think I realized how insidious and negative that narrative was around aging until I turned 40. And I started to have this internal thing of, oh, maybe I can't do this. And, you know, this is what they say happens to you after you turn 40. And what if your body just starts to crumble? And so that was something that required a lot of work to overturn, because before I turned 40 in the pandemic, and before that, I had taken part in a weightlifting competition, and I'd done fine. No, actually, I did really well. And then the pandemic happened, and then I had long COVID for about 10 months, so I couldn't really lift or do any of the stuff that people were doing at home, like no jumping jacks for me, you know. And then when that dissipated, I wanted to ease back into lifting weights again. But this time I was in my 40s. And I'm really ashamed to say this now, but if I'm being compassionate, I do understand why I felt that. As I was working my way back up to what my previous levels of strength had been, there was this voice every training session that would go, well, maybe you can't do it now because you're in your 40s. And I'm lucky that I have a coach who is a similar age to me, and we would talk a lot of this stuff through. But from a physiological point of view, like let's say when you look at things like physically getting stronger, there isn't really any reason as to why you can't keep doing that in your 40s. You might need to do things like eat a bit more protein because your body, there's less uptake of it, so you need to eat more of it as you get older. And there are, various things that are facts around getting older, for sure, and your recovery times and mobility. But that doesn't mean that you can't still have like incredible range of mobility. And I think that when I was just about to turn 41, I took part in a weightlifting competition and I beat the amount that I was lifting when I was in my 30s. And that for me, I was so surprised when it happened, because I think in my mind's eye, I was like, this isn't going to happen for me, And consistently every single year after that, I have gone on to become physically stronger than I did the year before. And that helps to overturn that narrative, because I can't look to my parents' generation. My dad has always been a fitness person. He's always cycled. He's lifted weights on and off. But there's no frame of reference. I don't know anyone that's done a performance-based sport in my family before. And so I had to figure that stuff out myself. But in a way, it was actually a really good thing, because it was evidence that I was able to cling on to in the face of a very, very strong, overwhelming narrative around aging that tells you that you will only be able to do less, And from weightlifting, I mean, I know we might get into it, but I started to learn martial arts a couple of years ago. And Tom, I did not know if I was capable of doing a cartwheel or doing a forward roll or a backwards roll. Like, we didn't do stuff like this at school. Like, because a lot of those people who do martial arts in my gym have been doing it from a very young age. And when they showed me a forwards roll, I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. And it works. And my spine bends in positions that I didn't know it was physically capable of doing. So I think it is possible. But there is a mental block there. And the question is whether or not I think you can push past the mental block.
Yeah. And that mental block, I mean, is that because one is automatically buy into the societal view of what is expected of you at this age? Is it about your own personal fear? Like, why does that stuff come up? Why aren't we just allowed to express ourselves however we want at whatever age?
I think that there is a societal view around what you should and shouldn't be able to do. I mean, I don't know what the situation is for men, but if, for example, you previously, like even 5 years ago, looked up a stock image of a middle-aged man, right, doing exercise, what would you...
I have this conversation with my friends all the time. When I was 18, thinking of me at 41, I was like, it's not how I look now.
No.
And I say that as a compliment to myself. I'm not afraid to say that, because I thought I was going to look like my dad did at 41, and he did not look, great. So, yeah.
Yeah. And also you get lumped in with men who are in their 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
No shade to anyone in their 60s and 70s, but it's a very vast spectrum. You're not the same as if you were in your 40s. And for me, when I looked up images, it was an elderly lady carrying 2 kg pink dumbbells. Right. And I just thought, okay, that's not my current reality. And so it's really difficult to build something for yourself when there isn't a whole amount around you that supports a different narrative. Sure. We are very lucky to live in a time where that is changing and has changed. So I for sure know that I specifically gravitate a lot to older women in their 60s who are doing incredible things. Yeah. But we also have this like amazing guy in our gym who I started doing freestyle wrestling about 18 months ago. But I was like, in my head, I just thought, I don't know if I can do this, because this is mad, because the people who do wrestling are kids in school, right? Or really young people. And there was this guy called Andrew who was 59 who did the wrestling class, and he was so helpful. And he just said to me, look, I took up wrestling like 2 years ago, so he still would have been in his late 50s. And I think being able to see him do it and to hold his own against younger men, he's now moved into MMA, so mixed martial arts, which is just because he must be like in his 60s by now. And so I think it's really important to have people around you or people you can access that can show you something slightly different, because I think a big problem is that we don't even try because we don't think that we can do it, because it seems ludicrous to be able to do.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely think the mental block is real.
So that's a mental block and a societal point of view, but then also, I mean, it'd be really interesting exploring a little bit around things like the impact of social media and whether or not that presents a different version of what was presented a generation ago, which might either limit us or even empower us as we get older. Like, have you seen the impact of that? Does your book touch on any of that stuff?
It does. I would say that my experience is that I think it empowers us. I think that there are parts of social media that can be incredibly difficult and toxic. But if I'm being really honest, the elements of that feel like it exists mainly amongst my peer group and people who are younger than me. So I do curate my feed quite carefully.
Yeah.
I think that social media has exposed me to subsections of society that I never would have access to in my real life community or social circles, right? And so being able to see men and women take up, Brazilian jiu-jitsu or skateboarding, or to become fashion influencers in their, 60s and 70s, I think roadmaps the diversity that lies ahead. And you don't necessarily have to, it might not be your thing, but you know that there's a possibility, or maybe it sparks a different idea. And I think it allows us to tap into a much more global network that we probably won't have in terms of, I don't know about you, but the majority of people I socialize with are my friends who I've known for a very, very long time. And as much as I love them, they do not represent a wide range of diversity. I'm not even talking about, in terms of professions or anything like that, just in terms of what we do as hobbies. And so I think that is really important. And I've definitely seen a massive boom for older people accessing that and using it in the last, I would say, even 5 years or so.
Yeah. Do you know what? I hate giving social media any credit at all, because I think it is net negative for society. But you are right. Even when you think about influencers and content creators that sort of reclaim a narrative around, either specific hobbies or even just what does it look like to be someone with, a valid opinion or something to say on the world. And that is starting to filter down into brands and the gatekeepers that have the money to actually, represent people in a different way. And I think that's a positive thing overall. I
think so, because, for example, let's say if you're talking about middle-aged or older people, right? A brand may not necessarily cast them in a global ad campaign, but they probably would, I would like to think, in an online campaign, because, you're able to just be a bit more agile with it. There are lower financial stakes and so on. And I also think that it eliminates the hierarchy that exists in traditional media. And, as someone who has been a journalist for 23 plus years, there is so much gatekeeping around that. Who tells those stories? Who they have access to in their own limited circles and networks, right? And so I feel that social media allows people to access it in a very direct way, but also to have a wide variety of opinions about a singular experience. And I don't always feel like that in traditional media. In traditional media, I still feel like it's very much like, the Brian Johnson school of longevity of like, what is this one pill that I can take that will shave 20 years off my... So I think that it's the nuance and conversation that I really appreciate on social media. As much as I know you don't love it. But
I suppose, in the practical, we talked about this, and it's, you can curate it and make it what you would like it to be. Interestingly, my other half says that my social media discover page is a massive green flag, because there are no girls with bikinis. It's just like lovely, wholesome, important stuff. But so there is an opportunity to do that. But my worry with social media more broadly is that it pushes content to people that maybe are vulnerable or aren't able to, understand nuance within that content. That's the thing that worries me about it.
Yeah, and we live in a algorithmic society, right? So you tend to get, if you wanted to seek information that sits outside of your own social sphere, you do have to proactively
Yeah.
seek that out. You know, I mean, platforms like Instagram and TikTok are hugely youth driven.
Yeah.
And so they're not necessarily going to show that stuff to you. But once you start following a few people, it should hopefully feed you that kind of content. But I love that your feed is like that. That's really
Green flag feed. Yeah, to hear first. But I even write on social media because, you know, I think I really, really hope that the stuff I put on social media is impactful and has like a good message behind it. It just doesn't perform as well as the 20-year-old equivalent of me when he puts out the same stuff does. You know, it's just an inevitable part of life, sadly, that like if someone sees me on their explore page versus a very handsome 20-year-old model, they're going to engage with the model more than they're going to engage with me.
But they're engaging on a very surface level.
Sure.
You know, there's no depth to that at all. I feel that also, I mean, half the time when I'm half asleep, like drooling on my phone, I will just like tap and like any old crap.
Really?
So I would say that you probably have like really good engagement in terms of, you know, people actually absorbing that message. And I would rather take like 5 likes from people that have actually properly read the caption, because I do love writing a long caption. Then, you know, I don't know, like 5 times that of people who are just going to like it and then not actually read it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That leads me neatly on. It's not even in my notes, Poorna, but I've got to ask you about it because we talked about it before. Are you happy talking about dating? And
sure.
I guess the reason why I want to ask that is because dating's hard for everyone at the moment. I feel like as you get older, you become better at dating because you become better at understanding yourself and what value you have as a human being, what you're willing to put up with, what you're not willing to put up with. And it gives you a better sense of your package, I guess, which you then would present to someone that you're on a date with. But how has getting older impacted your life when it comes to dating?
I think so. This is something that I wrote about in the book, actually. There's a whole chapter around dating and how that changes from when you're younger and the pressure that is on dating when you're younger. And I do fully appreciate that the stakes are different for someone, for example, who really wants kids. And, you know, if you want to have them biologically, of course, there's a biological imperative around that and timelines and so on. But we are very lucky to live in a time where there are options around that. But I think that for me, when I was younger, I felt that I had to fulfill that narrative around meeting my soulmate, meeting the one. And then once I met that person, you know, that life would be sorted and everything would be amazing and I would find peace. And I did meet my soulmate. I was very lucky. I met my my husband Rob, who was actually through a blind date that I thought was going to be like terrible, and I was very pessimistic before going to the date and had only planned to stay for an hour, and it was incredible. And we ended up getting married. And a lot of people who would have followed my story know that Rob passed away, you know, 10 years ago, and that's a whole different story. But after he passed away, a couple of years after that, I started to dip a toe back into dating. And I think that I've noticed how my approach to it has changed in terms of even in my 30s, where I probably would have thought that I was wise and I had all of this life experience and I knew. I still think that I wasted a lot of time in situations that probably weren't the best for me. And at the same time, I think I was also trying to force myself into serious dating or looking to meet someone in a serious capacity without actually asking myself if that's something that I wanted. Now, when I hit 40, I crystallized the desire to maybe not have children, because in my 30s I was still like a bit unsure about it, and in my 40s I had a long think about it, and I thought actually it's something that is just not for me, and I'm really good with that as a decision. And that really altered how I date. But I would say that there are still some takeaways from that. I think that I understand why people feel really pessimistic around dating. I think that dating apps also make things really hard for anyone who is engaging with them for different reasons. But I do think it's about coming back to yourself and filling your life with the things that you want, that give you joy and give you peace and give you contentment. When I was younger, I thought that those things came from another person. Yes. And I felt like that only could come externally. And the older I've gotten, the more I realize that can only come internally. And therefore, anyone who comes into your life is an extension of that. And in the same way that you can pour all of that love and joy, and you want to make their lives better, they have to make your lives better in whatever package that looks like, right? And so that has allowed me to release the outcome when it comes to dating. So what I initially go into, and people will ask that question, what are you looking for, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I get it. I understand why you're asking that question. But for me, I don't know what kind of connection we're going to have until we meet, because it's not just me dictating terms of what I want. And hey, here's my little like checkbox of everything that I want on it. You're also bringing your own like good things, your bad things to the table. And that to me has to be a mutual conversation rather than me insisting on what I want our lives to look like.
I love that.
Yeah. And so when I know we might touch on it, but like even something like compromise, I'm just like, compromise to me is a tricky word because it just sounds like everyone's having a bad outcome. It doesn't sound like anyone's having a good time within that. But I think if you can just continue to have conversations, whether that's your first date, whether that's your relationship, where you're constantly evolving things. And I spoke to people who've been married for like 20, 30 years. That's the secret to their relationship, you know. And I think the same could be true of when you initially start dating someone. If you, it's about retaining that lightness and that fun in there. Also remembering what's your internal voice saying around things. But I find dating okay. Some dates are great. Some dates are not so good. The dates that are great might not necessarily last beyond the first like date or two. That's okay. But I just find that like not being aggy about it and not feeling resentful, like the other person owes me something, has allowed me to, I think, take a bit more enjoyment in it. Yeah.
It's such an interesting point you made around that. The classic question when you want to go on a date with someone is, what are you looking for? And that's not a question. If I asked you that question, if we were on a date, that wouldn't be a question for you. That would be a question for me, because it's me expecting to be validated by your response, by you saying, oh, I'm either looking for, 6 foot tall, dark haired man, or reading off a bunch of personality attributes, which I can then reflect on and say, yeah, I'm that person, you know? But you're right. You don't know what you're looking for until you're there with that person, because even the concept of a relationship can be very, very stretchy. And you might be open to something very casual with a certain person. You might be open to a lifelong relationship with someone else,
I think that I love the fluidity around that. And I also, because the thing is, if you think about it, right, I know people who are in my peer group, but who are, let's say, maybe 20 years into their relationship, like a very small number of people, admittedly. But they met their partner when they were a completely different person. Like none of us are the same person I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, let alone 20. And so that conversation, exactly as you said, whether it's on the first date, whether it's like however many years down the line, is really important, because it's okay to change your mind about things. It's okay if your priorities have shifted. Where it becomes a really big problem is when, I think, whether it's, again, at the start of dating, when you're trying to conceal parts of yourself that you know to be true to make yourself more lovable and more palatable to the other person, and just burying that problem for further down the line. And I've seen it happen in my own relationships. I've seen it happen to other people. And so I don't mean this in a, when people say, I'm just being honest, but, and then go on to say something really offensive. You can communicate what it is that you desire and what you want in a way that doesn't necessarily make the other person feel inadequate because they don't quite fit that template. And very often I feel led by emotion and how I want to feel within a situation rather than the architecture of it. And that, again, has also allowed me to just be a bit more open-minded to the things that I need to feel commonality with the other person about, that might not be also stuff that I don't know everything about everything, right? So I might like to think how I would react in a particular situation, but there have been times when I've been on a date with someone and they've done a particular job or they have a particular lifestyle, and on paper I might not have necessarily thought that was appealing, but then I get to speak to them as a person and see all of that kind of 3-dimension kind of pour in, and that is a completely different thing, and I've ended up changing my mind about something. So
this is it. And it's what I say to every single person that listens to this whenever we talk about dating, is don't go into those environments with judgment, go into them with curiosity, because, ultimately you're absolutely right. I remember when I was single, one of the first questions that people that I would date would ask me, they'd say, well, how long have you been single for? And I'd say right, about 7 years. And they'd be like,
Yeah.
red flag. And that doesn't allow for any context or nuance. It's like if you hold space to actually understand that person's journey, their behavior, it's like for me, I wasn't really in a position where I was able to date seriously.
But I think that's actually a great question for someone to ask, because then I know that I'm never dating them again. Because I think someone whose emotional intelligence is so low that they think that the number of years that you've been single is like a red flag.
Yeah.
I'm like, we're not on the same level. It's okay. You can live life for maybe another 10, 15 years, and then at some point maybe we'll meet each other like halfway, but we're not on the same journey.
Yeah. Oh God, I wish you were in my life at that time. Would have given me a lot of reassurance. But do you think that as you get older, there is more of a reticence to allow for different types of relationships, i.e. at the age of 40 or above, should you only be interested in a long-term committed relationship, potentially with children?
I think that, as in, do you mean that we live in a society that prioritizes that kind of relationship above?
Yeah.
I think the value that we give to that type of relationship is like at the top of the pyramid, because of the things that we've all been conditioned around to want and have, and what we think that says about a person.
Yeah.
I would say that having lived the years that I've lived, I've also learned that actually counts for nothing, because I know people who have been in extremely, extremely long marriages, and I'm even looking ahead to my parents' generation, and people hate each other in those relationships. And so I think it's meaningless. I think it's about the quality of the relationship.
Yeah.
And so while I fully appreciate the hard work and sacrifice that goes into healthily maintaining those relationships, I don't think it's always a given.
Yeah.
I definitely know that for me, because people always want to know this, when I say I'm dating, and people assume that I'm dating to meet someone in a serious capacity. Yeah. And I said, it's not that I'm not open to that if the right person comes down the line, but I also have a really busy life, and I have friends and family that I don't get to see as much as I'd like. And, I do like insane hobbies. And so I think that what suits me for now is something casual, and that's okay. And I can be open to all of that. And I also know people who date in that capacity, but I think it is becoming a lot more acceptable as you get older.
Yeah.
Especially, there is this study that I reference in the book, which is that Morgan Stanley study that everyone references from 2022, which looks at women who are in their 40s and 50s, and maybe they've been married or maybe they've been single for a while, and they have no desire really to enter into a long-term partnership, right? And it's not because they've given up on people. It's just because the percentage of people who will come along who have that same, who can match your fluidity, who can match your ease, and maybe have their own home. They don't necessarily have to live together or whatever it is. That is a small number of people. And so they're actually okay being by themselves and compromising on areas of their life which they might not want to.
Doesn't the data say that men who are married live longer and women who are single live longer? I think that's what I read.
It is the data, but actually there is a statistic that says that women who are happily married are happier. Like they are the happier demographic.
Right.
Emphasis on happy marriage.
Yeah.
And so whatever that looks like for a person, is different. But I fully appreciate the first statistic you quoted, because I can see why that might be.
Exactly. And I reflect on this stuff a lot, and I reflect on my desire for independence when I was in my 20s. It wasn't really a desire for independence. It was a fear of connection. It was a fear of being in a relationship, right? And again, this is another reason why it's very, it's very, very freeing to be able to be in a relationship at the age of 41, where I don't feel that fear, of someone seeing me and not liking what they see. I find it fascinating. And you mentioned something earlier about how you change as a human being, and if someone had dated me at the age of 25, I don't think it would have been a great experience for them. I was very, very selfish. And I think now, you never stop growing, as you mentioned. You never stop developing. But now, at least, at the age of 41, you know what your values are. You know what you stand for. And of course, you'll carry on developing. We talked about politics earlier. I don't want to get into that on the show because we'll never stop. But, even my politics still change year on year. But I feel like the version of myself that I present to my partner now is hopefully pretty consistent with the version of myself in 10 years' time, you know, and I wouldn't have been able to say that 10 years ago, if that makes sense.
It does, because I think that when I was younger, I mean, I feel like I occupied two different extremes. On the one end, totally avoidant and like scared of commitment and like would run away, you know, if I felt someone was getting too close that I didn't want them to. I was a nightmare in my 20s, by the way. And then at the other end, if I met when I say the right person, I'm talking about the person who like maybe would love bomb me a little bit, you know, would kind of just shower me with attention. I would just instantly like be into it, right? Yeah. And so there was like no middle ground. And from what it sounds like you've got, and definitely the thing that I also know is my compass, is safety within a person. You know, if a person is making me feel calm and peaceful and my nervous system isn't all over the place, that's how I know that that's the right fit. Whereas in my 20s, it was all about highs and lows. And, you know, I needed to feel that excitement around things. And so that is a wonderful, wonderful thing to realize, I think, as you get older.
But people tend to mistake that excitement for love or attraction. Yeah. And it's not, it's literally dopamine.
Or even chemistry. They tend to like confuse chemistry with love. And I'm like, no, you guys just want to have sex.
Exactly.
Like, that's not the same thing.
Have sex a couple of times, then come back to me and tell me how you feel.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so, I know.
I want to talk about the book. And, you know, I'm sure that there's a lot of work that's gone into it. Are there any, if you think about the audience that listens to the podcast, predominantly women between 25 and 45. So I just wondered, are there any sort of very, very interesting or relevant topics that you discuss in the book which might feel relevant to the audience listening today?
So 25 to 45 is my main army.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. I would say that there are some significant common things that come up within that age group, right? And it's a fear that the decisions that they make around their lives will be the ones that they will be stuck with until the day they die, which, if we look at the current, you know, figures, might be in your 80s and possibly, you know, I would say late 80s now we're probably looking at. And that is just not the case. I think that one of the things I learned from the book isn't just about my own experience. I interviewed a lot of women for it. I also ran a survey where women could anonymously share their stories with me, and the possibility of reinvention or different chapters of your life are possible at any given age. And for example, when we consider things like relationships, there are women who are stuck in relationships, and especially when kids are involved and, you know, things are a bit messy, where they feel that they have to prevail in those relationships for many different reasons. And there are older women who I have interviewed who can reassure you in the book that if it is the wrong relationship, there is no age that you are too old to not give yourself permission to get out of that relationship. So really, it's about figuring out what your autonomy is in a situation, what your advocacy for yourself is in a situation. And I think that that cuts across things like your career. So what are your pillars of success? I think that for many of us, men and women, we have been roadmapped a very patriarchal model of success, which is money and power. That just might not work for people. And it's okay if your pillar of success is like, I want to just spend more time at home, or you want to hang out with your girlfriend more, whatever that might be. And so I think that the ultimate message that I wanted women to take away from that book was to deconstruct some of the things that they'd absorbed, that they just believed, you know, in the same way that I had just believed were inevitable, because they're not inevitable. Change is possible at any age. But also, I didn't want to be the one to tell you, this is what you should be doing with your life. I wanted you to kind of figure out that solution for yourself in a way that was compassionate, where you're not beating yourself up for decisions you made in the past. And also just tapping into stuff that gives you joy. I think that life is too short to not do that. And it shouldn't just be the preserve of people who have money or who have access to resources. There are accounts from women who sit across a wide range of spectrums in terms of identity and experience.
There is this delicious irony to the path that so many people choose, where you do all the things you're meant to do. So you work hard at school, you go to university, you get a good degree, you end up in a grad scheme for a hideous corporate somewhere. You work your ass off, you get to a 6-figure salary at the age of 35 or 40, and then you have this crashing realization that all of the things that you're meant to do aren't the things that make you happy. And I see so many men and women, you know, and obviously women, like, you know, child rearing often will be the reason why that journey comes to an end, rightly or wrongly. But for men, I see it in my friendship group, I see it in the men's group that I run, where all of these men, right, on paper, they're doing well. They have successful careers, and they are so unhappy because they don't have any purpose or joy, you know. And I find it absolutely fascinating. I can't help but feel like, because of capitalism, like the way that we define success needs to be completely rewritten.
Yeah. Because I think it's really terrifying for the type of people that you describe. And I also know people who are they're in that grind, of even if they are earning decent money, that the idea, because their lifestyle now matches the money that they're making, right? So all of this stuff ends up being a trap, because you just think, well, I can't possibly give this up because this has to keep going or whatever. And I understand some of that. And in some situations, there are circumstances that are very hard to talk your way out of. If you've got dependents, whether that's elderly relatives or kids or a massive mortgage or whatever. But it doesn't mean that if you want to change things, that it's not possible. It probably won't happen overnight. It might need to be, a longer view.
Yeah.
But if overnight something about your circumstances changes, and we've already been through like a collective iteration of this with the pandemic, so most of us know that we're capable of adjusting to like crazy circumstances overnight. I think that is possible, but it's really, really hard to create that change if you can't even see or think about what the reality is that you want for yourself and to work towards making that happen. And in so many cases, it's because people think that they either don't deserve that, or it's just not possible, or what is it that they have to lose? Like, what status do they have to lose by giving that up?
Oh God. And
status is something that can be taken away from you in an instant. So why are you holding so tightly onto it, But I think that everyone has to do that work around deconstructing and really interrogating these things to see them for the flimsy things that they are. But that's why it usually takes something like death or illness to like shake people out of that. And it's a shame, because it shouldn't have to take either of those two things. And
I can't help but feel the accumulation of, like things which make you feel good about yourself, status, like things which cost money, which are meant to help you, like that just makes you more unhappy, because you end up putting your own value into something external. And are there any other things in the book that you want to talk about, stuff that my audience can learn from?
I think that there's a lot in the book. There's a lot in the book that I think just the things that we have innately believed that we didn't, even if you feel that you are a very progressive person, I think that there are things that I didn't realize I had just innately absorbed. And one of the examples I always give when we're talking about the differences, and in the same way that men are pressured and hardwired by society into thinking that economic success is your most valuable contribution to the world. And so for women, the counterpart is domestic success and so on. And I think that unraveling that is really important. I loved what you posted recently about, things that we view as being feminine and masculine, because I also think that it's absolute rubbish. It's not in our DNA. We are not hardwired around certain things innately. And we can change that story. And I would just say that we are moving, hopefully, towards a time where our identities are more fluid, and they are much broader than, like, let's say if I think about my mum and my dad's generation. And I think that I would like people to harness that, and not everyone in your life might agree with your decision. I think that's also the thing. You may have to seek out community that is beyond the communities that exist for you currently. But whatever change it is that you want to make, be assured that there are many people before you and existing and now who have made those changes and who have gone on to live very valid, very seen, very happy lives. But jumping over that initial hurdle is really daunting, but don't be afraid to do it.
It is, you're right. This really resonates with my own personal life. I found that you have to make sacrifices, and that can be quite difficult sometimes. And when I reflect on my own personal experience, the thing that comes up time and time again is this resistance to people that have known you for a long time, for your desire to want to show up in a different way and add value to the world in a different way. And what I do now, I was in corporate for like 17 years, and that was my whole identity. And then when that's stripped away from you, like I stopped working in my corporate job at the end of January, and I just felt anxious and lost for 6 weeks, because I was like, this is the thing that I get up for every morning. It's what I say I am. When people are like, what do you do? And what do I do? Is like, it shouldn't be about my job, but it is about my job. So I'd be, like I work in a PR. I work for a very good award-winning PR agency, and that was how I defined myself. And now I don't know what to say. I'm like, what do I do? I don't know. But it's like, what do I do? Well, I spend a lot of my time thinking about myself and how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah.
And that's not defined by a job. It's like a mindset, So
it is. And also people that are still stuck in that cannot comprehend of what life might be like outside of that structure.
Yeah.
So that's why it is important to have other people who have done similar things to you, so you can retain those friendships or those relationships that you have with people that are still stuck in that, that system. And I understand why people choose it, and I chose it for many years because of the safety and the money, actually, quite frankly. So but I also realized when I was leaving my corporate job, those were not going to be the people that were like, hey buddy, I think this is a really good idea, you're really going to find yourself.
Right. Honestly, it's the opposite of that. They're the people that, respectfully, they don't show up for me now, because I think there's a little bit of fear and a little bit of a lack of understanding, and then also probably a little bit of jealousy.
Yeah.
I post a shitload now, and I hate doing it, but I have to. And that not once they liking or comment and being like, this is awesome what you're doing. You're helping these thousands of men, for example, with the men's group. They just step away.
Yeah, bad vibes. You don't need bad vibes.
But this is what I was saying about sacrifice. It's, if I think about the guys that I grew up with and the guys that I went to uni with, they are resistant to change because they want to see you wearing the same mask that you were wearing when they first met you. It feels uncomfortable for them to have to embrace a new version of you,
Yeah. I hear you on that. I think that, I don't know if you have this feeling sometimes, but when I feel like I have to shrink myself, and when I can't talk about things in my life or, maybe good things that have happened, I know that I'm in the wrong company. And it makes me really sad because, sometimes these are people that you've known for a long time, but I also know that I don't want to be in rooms or places where I feel like I can't be myself. And I've seen what the price that you have to pay in order to do that, and I just don't really want to pay it anymore.
Do you ever find yourself in environments where you feel uncomfortable, and it's not because you're shrinking, but it's because you feel intimidated or you feel worried about how you're going to show up?
Sometimes yes, but increasingly no. I think that physicality has a lot to do with it. I think that I definitely think that doing sport, especially I would say a mixture of like strength and combat sports, as a woman, and especially, as a relatively short South Asian woman, I think that physicality is something that I think I used to be really aware of, especially when I was in boardrooms and it was all men in that. Wow. And I think that those things allow me to just sort of like occupy the space that I'm in a lot better. And I have seen how that has changed over time. But also I think that this has taken a lot of hard work. I'm not sort of saying it flippantly, but I always used to be different people in different rooms when I was younger, and now I'm one person in whatever room that I'm in. And so the idea of being found out or being ashamed or whatever that insecurity is that I used to have, I don't have that anymore, because I'm able to encompass all of those parts of me in the same person. So I definitely feel that less now. And so if I say something that someone doesn't like or thinks is dweeby, or, it's okay. That's fine. It's all right. That's me.
That's a great way of looking at it, because I think everyone can resonate with that, is that showing up based on the expectation of what those people, you want those people to think about you. And what that ends up with is you then worrying about not being consistent with how you shout at those people and fucking it up, and then being like, you've been like, yeah, I'm married with 2 kids, and then them being like, okay, how are your kids a week later? And you'd be like, I'm not married with 2 kids. This is awkward. So
Yeah, that is a whole different identity.
yeah,
I would say.
yeah, oh yeah. So, Poorna, I just want to ask you one question. What is your one piece of advice for somebody that is worried about getting older?
The current narrative around aging is fear. And if aging was about liberation, then people would have nothing to sell you, right? And so extricating yourself from that only allows for possibilities. And possibilities isn't how we've been sold getting older. And just keep doing the things that you love doing for as long as you possibly can. And it turns from a fear-based narrative into a possibilities-based narrative.
But Poorna, final part of the episode, is there anything you might want to talk about in terms of what you're doing with the book, or anything in terms of journalism at the moment that you might want to promote?
The book is probably the biggest thing that I'm talking about at the moment, and we're doing the whole circuit of literature festivals with it. I would love it if people, whatever your gender, whatever your age, give it a read. And most importantly, I wrote this book for someone to be able to give to a friend, especially if that friend seems stuck, if they have asked you for advice 1,000 times and just don't seem to be taking any of your advice. It's meant to be a compassionate arm on the shoulder to guide them through something in a way that makes them think it was their idea, but actually it's the ideas of many, many women that I've interviewed for the book.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. You've been such an inspirational guest, Poorna. I really mean that. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.